I'm in conversation with folks of African descent and with Afro-feminists around reproductive justice issues. It's important to me because it's sort of like working out of isolation. It's finding one another. It's naming. It's finding voice. It's giving name, finding voice. It's connectivity, and there's a lot of power in that. You know, each other power of people is what we have. I'm deeply committed to sort of that building radical collaborations.
I grew up in segregated South Africa as a white South African and trained as a midwife. And when I trained, wards were still segregated. And I saw the difference of disease that white people experienced and black people experienced in relation to their reproductive health, their sexual health. And it was directly related to inequality and racism. So that has kind of left me very much who I am. These issues, even though apartheid ostensibly has changed and we've been liberated, it's still black women that suffer. And so for me, these issues are critically important and they are impressed on my body. Even though I'm a white South African, I feel them deeply, and it was part of my growing up.
Even in the conversations we had in our groups yesterday, a lot of what came up was not around rethinking so much as re-engaging. So what happens when we re-engage and have a historical context, but understand that much of those histories that have been relegated to sort of the past so closely parallel. It sort of shifts in who the players are and maybe sort of what the overlying issue is. But they're so closely parallel what's playing out today.
Is population a big discussion point in the States?
I believe so in certain circles. It's sort of a deep analysis looking at green issues and population control. Within like the broader reproductive health framework, I don't know that these are conversations that are being had. In fact, I think they're ones that are being very much shunned, you know?
In my context, you know, population control was a big no-no and a big issue. And we had all this flurry of a new population policy, and it was like, okay, done that, tick that, and let's move on. And we're moving on through sexual and reproductive health. The way it's characterized in South Africa is we've got a Department of Social Development, and they have the National Population Unit, and they're doing a lot of welfare work, which is really fantastic. They are despised by capitalists because it's kind of, you know, they're creating dependency, and young girls are getting pregnant to have grants. And what is shown is that women use this money very creatively to sustain themselves. So you've got the health department that is then responsible for women's health, sexual and reproductive health. We did have one of the most progressive abortion laws in the world, possibly. We've got a great contraception policy, but it's not linked to other areas, and it doesn't get implemented. And in fact, we've moved away from sexual and reproductive health to maternal health.
Yes.
And we only see women as mothers, and we only care for them as mothers.
Right.
And in fact, on Twitter this morning, I was just checking 28th of May, our Department of Health has put out key issues of women's health, and it's about endometriosis, it's about polycystic ovarian syndrome. It does not deal with any issues of fertility and sexuality. It's just so narrow and so disappointing.
Taking us back to sort of addressing the issue from a very exactly.
Biomedical, you know, a woman as diseased.
And taking the individual out of community, the broader context in which it's,
So for me, this is quite refreshing, and I'm wondering how one actually inserts issues of race in South Africa are a real flashpoint. And population control does light up in terms of racism, and how one can then reignite a conversation about, you know, the lack of reproductive justice.
Are there avenues, have there been groups of folks that are having these conversations?
No, and it's very, very difficult. I mean, we have pretty much had the erosion of the women's rights unit movement in South Africa, and the state's public and private funding has been enormously successful in eroding women's organising in South Africa and in creating groups that work very much around medicalised, you know, issues of just contraception or just fertility control or just this.
I hear parallels as you're talking around specifically the erosion, the systematic erosion of sort of this comprehensive critical organizing around women's health, reproductive justice issues. These conversations, being able to sort of reignite much of that, for me, has been equally powerful. But it's the legacy of sort of the funding streams, right? When our work is so heavily dependent on being able to sustain ourselves.
So we've got this great policy, but the minister then launches it in American language of population control and says young women, teenagers, girls need to be controlled. They're having too many babies. And we've got this thing called the implant. It's the Implanon. And within the first 8 months, almost 1 million were inserted. People are so embedded in a local context that they actually don't see the wood for the trees, and they think, oh my goodness, we're helping women, we're helping our people, we're helping our girls, so that they can stay in school.
Because it's embedded within this rights-based dialogue too, right? Like it's for the betterment of community, because it allows the this issues of productivity, women's productivity, and
we need to look at how we look at a common problem, and the common of how inequality and racism is further perpetuating these issues.
Really centralizing and lifting the voices of those that are most impacted, who do the work, because so much of it is shaped by folks who are not directly impacted by it. So it's that juxtaposition, that pushback that I think will have the greatest impact. I wonder if newer movements have a much greater appreciation of like a much more lived appreciation of the intersectionality, and are willing to sort of create space and think cross movement and think like holistically, bring the whole self into space in a way that movements even 20 years ago were not doing. I feel like I'm invited to explore my histories and what the personal is, bring the personal into the space, and ask questions of what brought me to the work, and what ways am I connected to it still, and what ways do all these issues that we talk about manifest. Personalizing its impact on our gendered, raised bodies was not something that I did until very recently. There is this quote that I love of Audre Lorde's in Poetry is Not a Luxury, where she says there are no new pains. And what it allowed me to do is really even connect it historically, contextually, to the narratives of my mother and my grandmother and my great-grandmother, much of which, there's threads, right? And there's threads of both sort of what oppression has looked like, but also of what resilience has looked like. And that is a powerful place from which to center yourself and organize.
It's beautiful. That's amazing. That's so strong.
Thanks, Marion. I lean often on Afrofuturism, not only because it gives ideology, a way of thinking that centers folks of color, but also because it's like this counter narrative, right? A really rich counter narrative in which the narratives of folks of African descent are central to social justice, to society, period. It's a counter narrative, it's a transgression, it's a way of saying we are not what is undoing the world and the environment. We are not the source of it. In fact, we are power. We are resilience. We are the ones who have preserved. We are story holders and land protectors.
Being in the US, it's kind of, oh my goodness, I'm here in the belly of the beast, and I think it's always a bit strange as a white South African, you see it in bizarre things, people buy a pot plant for their office, and you walk in and it's got a sign saying, with thanks to the American people. It's extraordinary the hold that northern countries have on our agenda, on our work.
I feel and witness this sort of systematic erosion to this intersectionality, to programs working intersectionally, to sort of this cross-life whole experience type of thinking that happens when you have like single issue funded initiative and single funders too, like sort of huge mega funders that have emerged.
And as a white person, I'm always aware that I see this through white eyes. And so you like, what is happening there? And then you just like check, like, did you see what I saw? And then so then what do you do with it? What do you say? And it's about having the opportunity to talk with people and to share, because often one actually doesn't have the luxury to look up and to actually say, oh my goodness, this is happening.